Hi everybody, welcome to our webinar. We will just give a few minutes for everyone to be able to log in, but the numbers are going up already since we broadcast it. So welcome once again and thank you for joining us. And the chat function is going crazy already. Will this be recorded? Yes, guys, it will be recorded. And actually, if at the end of the webinar you fill our feedback form, you'll get a link to a Google Drive where in the next few days we will upload both the slides and the recording. Of course, don't freak out if we don't upload the recording today at 12, just because the webinar will still be going on. But if you give us like 2 days, 3 days, and then check the link that we send you in the automated email after you submit your feedback, you will find the recording and the slides there as well. We'll just wait another minute and then we will get started, and everyone that comes later will be able to catch up with us. All right, let's get started. So welcome everyone to the panel interview prep webinar run by In2MedSchool. The presenters today will be Rehaan, Seth, and Myurri, and this is hosted by me, Anna, and Charmaine. So first of all, what is In2MedSchool? Who are we and why do we do all of these free webinars? We are a group of more than 1,600 student mentors from all over the UK. And what we do is that we offer free mentoring sessions to students that are disadvantaged, are near 12 or 13, wanting to apply to medicine. We offer many educational opportunities, including one-on-one mentoring sessions, online webinars like this one, this is our fourth, and many educational resources to make the most of your medical school applications, including TikTok videos, a question bank with interview questions and more. So we have a little webinar etiquette, which is, of course, please use the chat and Q&A function appropriate. Don't write anything inappropriate, as this will be monitored and you will be asked to leave if you write anything that is not really polite. Second of all, please make the most of the chat function using questions because we will have a designated Q&A session at the end. Lastly, as I said before, this webinar is being currently recorded and will be available to view to everyone that submits a feedback form. As I said, you're gonna get a Google Drive link with the recording as well as the slides. So I made a little outline of the event just so you know what's coming for you. We have the first part that is going to be about scientific knowledge and Oxbridge style interviews. That's gonna be delivered to us by Rehaan. We then have a part about personal insights and the motivation to pursue medicine, and this will be delivered to us by Seth. We then have our last content part, which is the ethics and group activities and miscellaneous knowledge that one should bring with them to a panel interview, and that will be delivered to us by Myurri. We then have a Q&A session where Setthasorn, Myurri, and Brian, the founder of In2MedSchool, will answer to all the questions you guys have. So it's now with great pleasure that I leave the floor to Rehaan to tell us everything about the scientific knowledge we should bring into a panel interview. Take it away.
Right, brilliant. Thank you very much, Anna. So yeah, I'm just going to talk about how interviews might ask scientific knowledge and scientific reasoning, And then I'm going to use this as an opportunity to torch it into Oxbridge-style interviews, which I'm sure everyone's heard of as being, you know, very full-on, very scientific. But I'll break down the best ways to approach these kind of questions and what to do. So just to outline how science is basically asked. So the majority of interviews for med school do not really test application of science and maths. However, what is assessed is more so scientific reasoning, okay? And it's the ability to think logically and formulate conclusions when you're given questions and scenarios for different contexts. So for example, we can be given things like ethical scenarios, and even that in itself is scientific reasoning, because you've got to think like a doctor, you've got to think what would be your approach and think systematically as to how you do something. So this is all science in itself. In Oxford interviews, questions generally will be application of sort of organic scientific.
Rehaan, everything all right with your connection there? Hello.
Of science can you recall? Rather, it's about your ability to think, and it's your ability to articulate your reasoning in a logical, coherent, and intelligent manner.
Rehaan, are you able to repeat the slide, because you kind of froze,
Did
so
I
we
freeze?
lost you.
Oh, when did I freeze? Sorry. Was it around there? Okay.
Yes, around there.
Right, so all I was saying was, so in Oxford interviews, generally the science is more obvious, so it's more application of knowledge. So generally you'll apply your learning in biology and chemistry, occasionally maths and physics in like different contexts. And again, it's not about recall, it's not about how many facts that you can recall, rather it's about your ability to apply your reasoning and how you think and articulate your reasoning in a logical, coherent, and intelligent manner. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's a list of 7 ways that we've sort of pooled together in terms of how they can ask scientific knowledge. So one of them is reasoning and choice within scenarios. So the most common and fruitful example of this is the ethics thingy sort of panel question, where you have to decide, you're given a scenario and you've got to pick which patient will get a liver or something like that. So that's quite a common one. The next thing is also interpretation of graphs and data and charts. So these are quite common in panel interviews as well. And it's about how you evaluate and analyze data and how you draw conclusions. I'll talk to you later on about that in more detail. The third thing is this whole concept of the doctor being a scientist, which is something that, you know, is in medicine a lot. And you might be asked to discuss what this statement means or what you understand about this and how this applies to medical school. The next thing, which then nicely ties into the last statement, is that this whole idea of evidence-based medicine, which is how to practice medicine, things like NICE guidelines, QALYs, which are quality adjusted life years, that sort of aspect, which you'll be using in your day-to-day life as a doctor. So they might ask, what's your knowledge of these 3 aspects? Then ask, how do you think a doctor needs to use these 3 aspects in their day-to-day life? And obviously medicine now, especially, is all about evidence-based practices, about having the right data to support what we're saying. Calculations, now this can be a big sort of topic, and sometimes people struggle with this, but don't worry, it's very basic maths generally. It won't be something too hard, nothing that you haven't been able to do before. It's just the maths, to be a doctor, you're not expected, you know, to start integrating graphs or something like that, but just do basic calculations, basic maths, just something like your fingers, and it'll be fine. Sometimes they're used in clinical contexts and things like drug dilutions or doses and unit conversions. So if you just have a look on the internet, but don't get too bogged down because this can get very, very complicated. But just have a quick look on the internet how to just do like drug dilutions. It's very easy. Like, how do you make a solution from 25 centimeters cubed to 250? Well, you add water. It's nothing that difficult. And then just unit conversions. Do you know the difference between grams and milligrams and micrograms, and how do you convert between these? Okay, and really, really basic maths. The next thing is your personal statement, obviously. And well, the fact that you're considering medicine must show that you have either a passion for science, or you've done projects that are leading you into this area of science, or you've done things like EPQs, which all again are part of scientific knowledge. So it's all about increasing your knowledge, doing wider reading and that kind of stuff. And then again, that links nicely to the last thing, which is basically off the spec information. So the more wider reading you do from things like journals, articles, publications, textbooks as well, past interviews, even things like just stuff you've read in like magazines. But when you bring all that knowledge together and you show that you have that, it shows that you have a passion, and that will then help you in applying your knowledge to more unfamiliar contexts. The more that you can widen your perspective, this is true for your A-level exams as well, the more that you can widen your perspective and think about concepts holistically, the better that you will be at applying them in unfamiliar contexts. Next slide, please. Thank you. Right, so my top tips for tackling Oxford interviews specifically. So number one is obviously you need to know the science. So brush up on your knowledge on AS/A-level science and generally maths, depending if you are doing maths. If you're not doing maths, that's fine. They'll know because you have to write down the subjects you do and what topics you've studied and what spec you do. Again, the interview for Oxford is more a discussion and it's all about application of knowledge. So you need to understand the big picture of concepts as well as how and why. They're the most important things. So often the way in which Oxford interviews are done is that they sort of like to paint a picture and build on top of it, or it's like a tower that they're building. So they'll start off with like a relatively simple question. So for example, what is the electron transport chain? Then they'll ask, right, okay, that's great. You know the science because you've been taught that and you can recall that. Good, you've got a good memory. But can you tell us why it functions as it does? Like, why do electron transport chain mechanisms exist within the mitochondria? Why do we need that? And then they might start asking, right, what if we start inhibiting parts of it? So what if we inhibit the proton pump? How will that change the pH? So obviously, if you inhibit the proton pump, you can't be protons, you can't have acidic pH. And then they might ask things like, well, how do you actually block a proton pump in itself? Like, what do you do to block a proton pump? How do you design a blocker? So don't worry, it's all about building this gradual picture. The next thing is to be able to interpret graphs as well, and then do a lot of sort of wider reading around that area. Again, it doesn't have to be things specific to medicine. You know, anything that interests you, like philosophy or literature, is a good idea as well. Yep, so graphs, wider reading. Number 4 is to display your talents beyond being an academic student. So this is things like hobbies, interests, volunteering. So once you've got this, these will all feed into you being able to apply scientific knowledge, because again, it's about widening your perspective. And then the most important thing in these interviews is to think out loud. Don't stay quiet and come across as reserved, because they're not going to like that. You need to express yourself in a concise, intelligent, and coherent manner. Articulate well, and just present your findings, talk through your working, and then again reread your personal statements. That's typical of any Oxford interview as well. Next slide, please. So I've made a little guide on how to actually go about analyzing data for when they give you weird and wonderful graphs. So this might be a good idea just to sort of have in your mind. And it's quite an easy guide. It's just to make a systemic approach to what to do. So the first category is understanding what it shows. So very simple things like read the stem, read the axes, and so on, and just look at the graph. Anything different? How does it change? The gradient, the start, the end. And the next category is to describe the pattern. And again, be as basic and simplistic as possible. Say what you see. Very simply, there is a sudden sharp increase up until 10 minutes before it begins to plateau off for 3 more minutes and then sharply falling. Very, very explicit, concise, and specific ways of saying things, and quote data like I just did before. And then the last thing, which I guess is the challenging part and could be more typical of Oxford interviews, is to explain why the pattern increases. So they might give you a graph of how, I don't know, the pH changes during oxidative stress, and you have to say, well, how does this happen? Well, it's because of respiration and proton changes and energy and all that. And then they'll give you enough information to try and help you get to different conclusions. But again, contextualize and embed your knowledge and then show off how much you do know. Next slide, please. Evaluating data is a bit different. So you've got to do everything else from before, but you've got to do more stuff. And those are generally presenting for arguments and against arguments. So for those of you that did the BMAT, this is very similar to the essay, where you've got to argue for the statement, then argue against the statement. So they could give you a conclusion from a graph that you've analyzed and then say, right, can you argue for this? Can you argue against this? Can you evaluate this? And then another good thing to sort of bring in is, well, have they done any statistical tests with the graphs? You might be worrying here if you don't do maths. That's fine, because you do stats tests in biology, but again, they'll know. And it'll be very simple things like, do the standard deviations overlap? If they do overlap, what does that show? If they don't overlap, what does that show? And again, making conclusions. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do now is present sort of the mock Oxford question. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to have a read of it yourself, and then I'll give a sort of model response and see how I'd approach it. And then there's one more question, and then we'll see what you guys said. Okay, so I'll give you just 30 seconds to have a read of that question. The context, I guess, is a bit grim given the pandemic now, but I thought it'd be relevant. What does virulent mean? That's a great question. I should have actually addressed that. So virulent basically means like pathogenic. So what makes it a virus? What makes it dangerous, if you like? What makes it highly infectious? That's what virulent means. So how does the structure of SARS-CoV-2 make it highly virulent? No worries. Okay, so how would I respond to this question, right? So if I've been given this, I take a second to have a look at what I can see. And the question is asking me, how does the structure make it virulent? And virulent meaning pathogenic. So let me think, structure. What things can I see in the picture? Well, I can see things like S-glycoprotein. I might not know specifically what S-glycoprotein is, but that doesn't matter. I know what a protein is, and I know that this protein is on the membrane of viruses. And if I cast my knowledge back to, I don't know, basic foundation GCSE science, I know the way viruses work is that they move through cell membranes. So logically, I can deduce that the presence of S-glycoprotein will allow it to attach to cell membranes, because that's how viruses work. And that doesn't require extensive amount of knowledge or power to generate. So I'll say things like, I can see lots of different proteins. The proteins could be used to attach to the membrane to allow for entry and invasion. The more proteins that are present, because I can see a lot of S-glycoprotein, that means more possible attachment sites. What else can I see? I know, what are the roles of proteins do I know? I know that proteins inside cells regulate the movement of things. So I can just say that this is about intracellular regulation of different products and organelles that are used to make different components of the virus, again, to make it virulent so it can replicate. What else can I say? Well, let me think about the immune system, viruses themselves. Proteins, what are they? Oh, they're a form, they could act as an antigen. What's an antigen? An antigen is some sort of foreign molecule or, a foreign substance in the body. So the S-glycoproteins act as antigens. And because there's so many of them, that could put the immune system into overdrive, and it could cause things like a cytokine storm, which again is very, very damaging for the body. So again, already I've just taken little bits and pulled together my knowledge from lots of different parts of biology. It's about thinking holistically and making these synoptic connections. What else can I see? I can see a lipid envelope. I know that lipid envelopes are non-polar, and I know that the membrane of the cell is also non-polar. So that means that the envelope can easily dissolve and enter. And I can see that in the picture. Look, the virus is entering into the host cell and the RNA is moving in. And again, I can say that, well, that RNA is needed for reproduction. So virus particles contain RNA to replicate in cells to make more of them. I can see that there's this envelope again around it, and I guess that's protecting the RNA. So again, there's lots of different things that you can draw from this, regardless of how unfamiliar it is. And it's all about thinking holistically from the spec, picking apart what you can see, and then applying that. Okay, next question, Myurri. So the next one, I guess, could be a bit harder, so I'll give you another sort of 15 seconds to have a read of that. Okay, so how do you think the structure of SARS-CoV-2 produces the common symptoms seen in patients with COVID? So that's things like fever, cough, breathlessness, loss of sensation. So I guess this can seem like quite a demanding question at your level, but again, if you just think through and break it down, it'll be fine. So again, we're carrying on from the structure. We've looked at the structure. We're going to think, how does structure produce symptoms? So let's start with the first one, fever. How does a fever happen in the body? Let me think. Inflammation, cytokines. Oh, I talked about this before. The S-glycoprotein, they act as antigens. They produce cytokines. That's inflammation. That causes a fever. Next one, cough. Now this, I guess, is a bit harder. Let me think. I mean, even if you haven't learned about coughs, what is a cough? Well, a cough, I guess, is the contraction of these abdominal muscles and like the expulsion of air out. Well, perhaps you can suggest that the virus is binding to epithelia lining the trachea, and that's triggering a cough reflex. Maybe it's sending nerves to the brain to induce a cough, or it's causing the contraction of the muscles associated with expiration, leading to the expulsion of air, which is causing a cough. The next symptom, breathlessness. I don't know about breathlessness, but I know breathlessness is, being able to breathe constantly. And again, that links to the lungs. So maybe, I don't know, the presence of the virus is causing hypoxia, which basically means low levels of oxygen because it's in the body and there's like stress. And because there's low levels of oxygen in the blood, the lungs are trying to accommodate for this by constantly breathing in more oxygen, and that's sending signals within the brain as well. The loss of sensation, I think, is the hardest one because it's a bit more abstract. But if you just think senses, what controls senses? Sensory neurons. That's just a basic, basic scientific fact. And I'm thinking, right, what things are lost in COVID? I know things like smell and taste. So maybe, I don't know, these S-glycoproteins or the virus particles are binding to neurons and they're destroying the neurons. Maybe they're inhibiting things like depolarization. And I know I need depolarization in order to generate nerve impulses to send to the brain to trigger these reflexes. Maybe that's why I can't smell or taste anything, right? So again, these can seem like very overwhelming questions, but if you break them down and you think, what do you know and how much can you extend that, you'll be completely fine. Okay, right. I think what we're going to do now is quickly pass over to you guys. So have a look, I'll just give you a minute or so, write down some things that you would have alternatively said. Again, there's no definitive mark scheme if you like, they're just some of my ideas, but if you've got anything, write them down and we'll see what people have said. We'll give you a few seconds to do that. Don't be afraid, just write anything you think. Let's have a look. I was thinking of exocytosis when the RNA goes into the cell. 1 second. So exocytosis of the actual RNA leaving the cell. Yeah, well, exocytosis is something exiting the cell. So I guess, yeah, you could say that because it is sort of, but it's more attaching and then budding into the cell. So I don't think it's actually called exocytosis. I might be wrong though. I don't think the mechanism is called exocytosis. I think it's just called attachment and invasion. But you could just say that mechanism in itself, that opening mechanism is advantageous because think about it. If this is the base of the cell and something just opens up and drops in, where's it going to go? Into the cell. It's not going to go out into, the fluid, or it's not going to go out anywhere else. It's going to go straight into the cell. So that could be an advantage. It's a good idea. Sorry, let's see what else someone's put. The virus is the lipid envelope, which allows it to fuse. Exactly, fantastic. It's made of lipids. Good, because it's all about the polarity. Well done. I was thinking the glycoproteins could bind to the cells. Fantastic, exactly. They could bind to cells in the lungs and cause inflammation. Fantastic ideas. I was thinking about the antigen path. Exactly, antigen path, systemic inflammation causes the symptoms. It reminds me a lot of HIV. Yeah, because a lot of, so HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, that's all about using RNA and putting it in and then using reverse transcriptase and all of that. So again, even if you don't know something about SARS and you read something, I don't know, 3 months ago, or you read someone on the train about HIV, just apply that knowledge, bring that back in because they're very similar. It protects it, fantastic. Free RNA acts as a transcription factor. So transcription factors are things that are designed to program transcription. It's more complicated than that. What the RNA will do is when it goes in, it will go and bind with another, it'll sort of open up the DNA within the cell and then I guess it will trigger transcription, fair enough. Hang on, what else are people saying? We'll just take a few more.
People are also saying that complementary shaped glycoproteins, like attachment proteins, allow the virus to bind to ACE2 receptors, which leads to the release of viral contents into cells.
Fantastic, yeah, good. And that's a good analysis of the diagram as well, because of complementary, that's a fantastic idea.
Also, because RNA is not DNA, it can be translated to be synthesized in the ribosome from the protein to be replicated.
Good, that's a good idea, because it doesn't have to go from DNA to RNA. It translates to be synthesized, exactly. Exocytosis and things that someone's asking. Because the RNA goes straight into the cell, it may be able to replicate in the cytoplasm via translation direct. Exactly, yeah, it's all about speeding up translation. And again, these will speed up the process the virus can replicate and then cause damage. Okay, fantastic, right. There were some really good ideas. Oh, we'll just do the last one. Could the fever cause loss of sensation due to increased temperature and changing protein shape? Yeah, that could be related to that. So fever, if you know, is controlled by the hypothalamus. And what happens is this thing called prostaglandin binds to that because of pyrogenic antigens. So if the temperatures are changing, if the protein shape is changing, that could be affecting the receptors of the cell. There's the symptoms. Fever may be caused by the immune response rather than the virus itself. Yeah, but the virus is what induces the immune response ideally. So the virus is virulent because it triggers that. So make sure you say the virus causes the immune response. So the virus is always the cause, and that's the effect is the fever. For 2, could the loss of sensation like taste be because it destroys taste buds? That could be a good idea. And then they might push you saying, "Brad, what do you know about taste buds?" Taste buds are actually just receptors. And you can say, well, maybe because they're complementary, it binds and destroys it. Right, I'm just worried about overrunning on my little section here, so I'm going to stop answering any more of people's questions. But thank you very much. I am going to have to go now. However, if you do have any questions that are specific to me, please email the In2MedSchool education team at education@in2medschool.com. If Anna, you can type that into the chat as well, that'd be great. So any specific questions, let me know. But thank you very much for listening. I hope that was helpful. Good luck, everybody. You've got this, okay? Thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Rehaan.
Bye, bye, bye. So just a quick summary there for you lot to read through whenever you get any time, okay? Don't so take care. See ya.
We now have Seth, who will talk to us about personal insights and motivation to pursue medicine and answer some other questions for us, just so we know how to approach these when the panel interview comes.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Anna. So hi, everyone. My name is Setthasorn, and today I will be speaking to you about tackling questions on personal insights and your motivation to pursue medicine. All right, so my first slide here is basically just to give you guys an understanding to what is personal insights. So I know I've listed a number of things here, so such as your ability to work in a team, to empathize, to recognize your strengths and weaknesses, and of course, so your motivation to pursue medicine, your suitability to pursue medicine as well. But the one thing that I've actually highlighted here that I really want to bring to your attention is this thing where it's your ability to truly understand yourself. And that is what that's what questions on personal insights want to actually assess you on. So what do I mean by your ability to truly understand yourself? And that is because questions which, like, you know, all the ones that I've listed here, like your motivations and all of your past experiences, what interviewers really want to know, and that's why they call it an interview, they really want to know about you. They want to know who are you, what are your goals, what do you want to achieve, not just in medical school, but also what you want to achieve in the long run. And they just want to know what kind of person you are and whether do you fit their medical school. So that's essentially what they really want to get out of you during your interview itself. And the only way, well, I wouldn't say it's the only way, but I would say the one way which can be really helpful to you, especially in tackling personal insights, interview questions, is your ability to truly understand yourself. That means you need to really take the time prior to your interview, you know, take the time to really understand what do you want out of your medical career? Why do you actually want to pursue medicine? What are the different events in your life that has, you know, inspired you to pursue medicine? Was it because of a family member? Was it because of an event that maybe happened to yourself? Different people have different reasons. Some people, they might have been inspired through watching movies or things like that. But the whole point is everybody has their own story, and it's your job to tell that story during the interview. And that's what I'm going to try to help you articulate over the next few slides in our webinar today. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so how to approach questions on personal insights. This is adapted from the previous webinar that was delivered by Anna, but I've also added in a bit of my own methods and how do I approach as to how I approach these kind of interview questions. So I think the common ones, which a lot of you guys are fairly aware with, is the STAR method. So situation, task, action, result, and reflection, and as well as the reflective cycle method. There's one right at the bottom there, which is called the ARIAL method. I'm just gonna make a disclaimer here that this is not a recognized method. As in what I'm trying to say is not something which I've seen on textbooks. If anything, it's actually something which I have used myself. So please do not go around telling people that it's something which is which is established out there. It is just a method which I personally use during my interviews, and it's something which I find really useful. And it's also a method which I can say that I advocate for. It's something which I actually tell my other mentees about as well. But there is no one framework for you to use. Obviously, in the end of the day, I would say it's just use whatever that you feel is best, is the most convenient for you, and which one you think would be the best framework for you to actually express your thoughts and for you to really get the answer across in an articulate manner, and as well as in a manner which is concise, where you can also explain whatever you want to deliver. Okay, so what does AREL stands for? So there it is. It's your argument, your reasoning, evidence or example, and your link. How this applies, I will explain it in the next few slides. But just very briefly, for those of you who aren't familiar with the STAR method, because I think that's the one which is very common among medical students especially, is that, so like I've mentioned, as you can see there, situation, task, action, result, and reflection. So your situation is where basically what they want you to do is to describe. So for example, if they want you to talk about your work experience and how that feeds into your motivation to pursue medicine, what they want you to first talk about is the situation. So, you sort of like paint the picture for your examiner, for the interviewer. How was the situation like? Say, for example, did you meet a patient who has, say, colorectal cancer, who has just finished his operation? Maybe you met him in maybe you met him on the wards, just sort of like really paint the picture, let the examiner have an idea of how the situation is like. And then you move on next to your task. So what did you do? Did you just, was it just a very short chat? Did you just observe him? Maybe you didn't actually even speak to him. Maybe it was like the task part of the STAR method is where you actually explain to your examiner what would you involved in. And your action is also pretty much similar to the task, but basically what they want to see is, hopefully, what they want to see is that ideally you wouldn't want to give them a scenario where your role only involved you standing and looking at what was going on. Ideally, what you want to do is to have something where you were able to take action, where you were able to show that you were actually involved in that scenario itself. So it'd be really good if you can actually choose an example of a scenario in your life where you're able to show that you've taken action at that point of time. And in terms of result, so what they want to see is, what were the results of your actions? Were you able to, say, assuming if your action was to actually speak to the patient after his surgery, maybe the result of your actions was to actually make his stay at the hospital much better. You could see that before the conversation, he looked a bit down, he looked a bit, probably tired, probably, the fact that he's probably just still very depressed over the fact that he's got, say, for example, colorectal cancer, and he's just still trying to recover from that. But maybe just you having that 10-20 minutes chat with him, that made a whole difference in his stay at the hospital on that day. And that, as a result, is something which I strongly believe that you should talk about at your interviews. A lot of you guys may think, well, it's only a short conversation. Well, I don't think I've made a very big impact with it. It doesn't matter. As long as it's something which you're able to show that you've actually done something, as long as it's a positive impact and it shows results, no matter how big or how small, it's always good to talk about it at your interview, because it shows that you have insight into the things that you've done. And lastly, your reflection. So how do you actually wrap it up in your reflection? So what interviewers often want to know is, what did you actually learn from it? What could you take home from that experience? And most importantly, the one thing which I say is most importantly, is in reflections, what I would say that is always good is that you try and talk about the lessons you have learned from that, from that from that whole scenario. Talk about how the lessons you have learned can be applied, or how you wish to apply it to your future self when you're in medical school. I would say that it's always good to try and show the interviewer that you're already thinking of yourself as a medical student at their medical school. So for example, let's say you have, like I said, back to the patient where you've spoken to him after his surgery, and say you've made his day better, because, well, he's probably had quite a tiring day having to go through surgery. Then you can say stuff such as, speaking to this patient has given me the satisfaction that, or has given me the confidence that, just having a conversation can actually make a huge difference in someone's life. And this is something which I look forward to, especially when I go on to placements in medical school. Just something like that, where you show them that you're actually thinking of yourself as a medical student already. So it shows they're able to link to link to what you are planning to do in the future as a medical student. So that's how you can approach the STAR method, and it's pretty much similar for the rest of it as well. So your description, feelings, evaluation, and that's when you use the reflective cycle method. All right, so yes, next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so the first question for today is just, again, I'm just gonna try and keep this interactive, and hopefully you guys can also sort of interact with me as well. The first question I've got for you guys today is, if an interviewer were to pose the question to you, why should we choose you instead of other candidates? How would you approach this question? So yeah, feel free to pop your answers in the chat. And don't worry, I have prepared model responses for you guys to understand how you can approach these kind of questions as well. Can your action be to research, find out more about? Yeah. So for example, let's say you've spoken to a patient with colorectal cancer, and say that inspire you to learn more about cancer, especially colorectal cancer, because it's one of the most common cancers worldwide. Yes, one of your actions that you could do, even if it's not within the scenario itself, it's something which you have actually gone home and you've done your homework to read up more about colorectal cancer. Yes, that can be a very good action to also talk about in an interview. Yeah, talk about having done a research project. Yeah. Yeah, you can talk about research projects if if that's something you should have done, and that's something which you are really passionate about, and you feel comfortable talking about your research project. Yes, that is something that you can actually feed to your interviewer when answering these kind of questions. So why should you, I know these kind of questions can be a bit tricky, because sometimes when interviewers ask you, like, whoa, okay, like now I have to actually sell myself, not just telling you why I want to pursue medicine, but I have to actually tell you why I think I'm better than everyone else. And it can be a bit of a tricky question, because depending on how you phrase your answers, some people can come off as very boastful, and obviously that's something which you don't want to have in your interview, because that's
Someone is writing in the Q&A, even though they wanted to use the chat function to answer your question. They wrote, can I say something like how I faced a lot of difficulties with my studies during GCSEs and A-level, but I still managed to complete the studies and get good scores?
still manage.
Do you think they could say something similar, Seth?
Yeah, so definitely, because I think, yeah, so I think what you're trying to get to is that what you're trying to demonstrate in this case is that you're someone who perseveres through tough times. Like, I know, sorry, just let me open up the question again. So the challenges you have faced during your GCSEs and A levels, and how you have managed to still be able to compete, and still be able to get competitive grades. So that is something which you can talk about during your interview as well, especially in this question, because it shows that despite the difficulties that you faced, that you're still able to persevere through, and to actually still manage to get competitive scores, and hopefully that is able to hopefully you're able to demonstrate to your interviewer that that is one of the biggest traits which you're proud of, and that's something which you think makes you stand out from the rest of the candidates. Okay, see, you've got a lot of responses now. I'll just quickly whiz through, and then I'll show you guys some of the responses that I've prepared. Okay, so you could talk about what skills you have that line up with doctor skills. Yeah, that's very good. So you always want to try and feed back to them the things which they are already looking for in a doctor. That's a pretty smart move. I like that. Yeah, tell them how you fit into their course, because you obviously want to give them an answer that is specific to their university. You wouldn't want to just give them a general answer which probably can be used for any university. If whenever possible, always try and relate it to how you think you fit very well into their course, and that obviously requires you to do research into their course itself before the interview.
I think a very good answer that has been written down and sent to us privately was that someone should be able to demonstrate drive, perseverance, and humility. And I think this is really good because it's a way for you to show that you have got the qualities that are needed to be into medical school, but also that you are aware of, what the qualities of a good doctor should be. And maybe you can say that you've seen them out in work experience or placement, just so you're basically showing that, you've prepared yourself to be the best version of yourself that you can be, to go into medical school. But all answers that I'm reading are really, really good.
Yeah, you guys are doing very, very well. So oh yeah, I like this one where so I believe my ability to self-reflect, involve myself in not only academical duties of a medical student, but also extra societies where you have a passion for making a difference for Black girls in wanting to pursue medicine. I think that's something that's very, very good. I mean, you know what I mean? Like that's something which, again, if and whenever possible, if you have something which you're truly passionate about and it's always better to give something that's personal to you. Bear in mind, this is an interview and they want to know about you. So if you give them an answer that is as specific as possible, do not worry about going to answers as specific. It's always good if you can be specific. Go into something which you can actually truly show them why you want to do medicine and why you want to actually enroll into their course. Well done, guys. All right, so just to give you guys some responses. So next slide, please. Right, so we've got this response. So it's response A. So what I've written here is I'm just going to quickly read out the keywords that this candidate has answered. So this candidate says that I'm a hardworking individual who has achieved a lot today. And then he talks about his past experiences that strongly demonstrates that he is the best candidate for the medical school. And then he talks about his commitment to medicine. And he says about that they've done a lot of work experience, for charities and to have shadowed consultants and GPs. And then he goes on to talk about witnessing rare surgeries such as, that he try and throw in big words such as like an MCA, STA bypass of a patient with Moya disease. And then he says that because of that, that has made him very interested in pursuing neurosurgery. The candidate then moves on to say that, that they have been consistently ranked at the top of the class and that they've played team sports, captain of the football team in the medical school, president of student council, and they've made a lot of positive changes. And then they move on to say that, that they're an approachable person, has a lot of friends, and that they have been checking on all of their friends to make sure that their mental health is well, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then they finish it off by saying that they are a well-rounded individual who is confident and that they can be a good surgeon in the future. Right. Okay. So with all of that said, what I want to know is, what do you guys think of this answer? Do you guys think do you think it's a model answer, or do you think it's something which is probably not going to come across as very well to the interviewer? Nice. I like that.
I agree with what's been said. The person is listing their achievements without self-reflecting and what they've learned from it, or how that makes them ready to be medical students, which is really good. It's good that you guys pick up this stuff because it means that you won't repeat these mistakes in your panel interview, right?
Yes, you guys. Yes, I think when you say that the person is just listing out their achievement without self-reflection, well done. You pick up on that. So as you can see here, I can see some candidates sometimes they get too excited and just sort of like throw examples, like just bam, but without really showing the interviewer that they've actually learned from these scenarios, or that they've actually truly reflected and take home, lessons from it. An example, and one very classic thing that some candidates do as well is that they try and like name drop. So when I say name drop, that means you try and like throw in big words to show, like, big fancy words to show like, oh, like I've done this, or I've read this, or I've done that. Be very careful about that, because some interviewers, obviously as an experienced interviewer, they would have heard of a lot of these. And some interviewers, if they want to be really nasty, what they can do is they can pick up, because they know that they have name dropped that particular, procedure or book or a research paper. If they want, they can be really nasty with you and question you specifically on that because you have brought it up. So for example, this patient has brought up about an MCA, STA bypass. This is a procedure that is not commonly done in the UK, I would say. especially because Myurri disease itself as well, it's also not very common. It's not a very common disease, especially in Western countries. And the interviewer can actually, question the candidate more about this. And if it's not something which you are familiar with, it can turn out to be very disadvantageous for you, especially if they ask you what's an MTA STA, what's an MCA STA, and you're not able to even explain that. That is not going to reflect too well on you. But yeah, okay. So you guys have also talked about how it sounds very egotistical. You don't think it's a model answer. It comes across as arrogant, ignorant, and no self-reflection. Well done, well done. Take note of all of these guys. Well done. So this is one thing that I want you guys to avoid when you have your panel interviews. Okay, so response B gives a very similar answer, but yeah, you can just have a read through it. So they talked about, so first they acknowledge, they say that I am sure all candidates today are of very high standard. So I think that's a very, well, I would say that's a very courteous way to approach the answer. So you first acknowledge, obviously people applying for medicine, a lot of you guys are high achievers, a lot of you guys are, have done a lot of amazing things, and every candidate will have something to offer. So a lot of times, being able to recognize that a lot of the candidates are of high standard and obviously the competition is very tight is something that's good and it's going to reflect well on you. Then you can go on and say that, however, you think that you have many good qualities that makes you stand out. And then you go on to explain how, so you can see here the response here is very similar to the one before, but then how this candidate differs from the previous one is that this candidate has also talked about a little bit about their self-reflection. So they've said things here about how their commitment to medicine and how their experiences have given them a good understanding of what being a doctor is like. They've talked about their academic records as well, about how they are actually hardworking, like, being able to be confident, to know that you're a hardworking student is important. And it's also always good if you can also show, talk about being validated by the people around you. So for example, your head teacher or your class teacher, or maybe your friends, maybe they consider you as people who are, they consider you as someone who is hardworking. They consider you as someone who is reliable, someone who they can go to, ask questions for academics or even for their well-being. So it's always good if you can talk about that. And then he talks about being a sportsman who understands the importance of teamwork. And he also talks about seizing opportunities um, to enhance their leadership skills, and talked about what are the different projects they've done as well. Yeah, and so on and so forth. So they talked about being approachable and interacting with people at all levels. And what's important about, say, for example, in communication skills, it's always good if you can show that how you have learned from your work experience, how that has made you a better communicator, and how you have also been able to develop listening skills throughout, not just from your work experience, but also from, say, from societies or from extracurricular activities. And then you just end it in a very nice, friendly way by just saying that you're dynamic. You can say, just use adjectives which you think best describe you. You're a dynamic, friendly person who believe that your motivation and inspiration will ensure you to have a successful career in medicine. So one thing that you don't want to do, like the previous candidate, where he said like, oh, I believe, like, I'm the best, I'm well-rounded, and I can be a good surgeon in the future. Even medical students aren't sure, like, no one, like, there's no way a sixth former would be able to tell, like, I'm going to be a good surgeon. It's just, yeah, there's, like, from the experience of just seeing one procedure doesn't equate to you being a good surgeon in the future. Okay, so how I'm going to break this down for you, if you could go to the next slide. So I'll break this down for you based on the framework which I'm most comfortable with. But again, in the end of the day, you don't have to exactly use the framework which I've proposed, just use what's most comfortable for you. So how this student has actually approached the question. So he starts off with a very open statement, just acknowledging that everyone is competitive in their own way. And then the candidate says that he has many good qualities that makes them stand out. So that's sort of like his argument. So what I mean by the A in the ARAL method, and when I say that that's the argument, basically what are you trying to get across to your interviewer in the whole of your response? So that's your argument. And then, so the next question you can ask yourself, so why have I said that, like, what makes me think that I have many good qualities? Why have I said that? So that's when you ask yourself the question, and then your first point comes up. So I believe that I have many good qualities because number one, I've been able to consistently demonstrate my commitment to medicine. So that's your R, your reasoning. And then you go on to explain to your interviewer, what have you done? You know, evidence or any examples that can help you back up whatever you've said before. So you have actually said in your reasoning part, you say that I've been able to reason that I've consistently demonstrated my commitment to medicine. Why, what examples or what evidence can I give to support this statement? So for example, in this candidate, they have said that they have done work experience in charities, you know, shadowing consultants and GPs over the past 2 years. And then what have you actually learned from it and how can you link it to yourself as a future medical student? So you say that all of these experiences have given me a good understanding of what being a doctor is like. So that's how you can approach the AREL method. And again, so you can see it's just about reasoning, evidence, reasoning, evidence, reasoning, evidence. It's just more of showing them a flow to your answers, because the last thing that you want to do is just sort of like jump here and jump there without really having a proper flow to your answers, and the interviewers will probably not be able to follow you as well. So you want to go step by step. If you're going to talk about academics, talk about academics up until you're done. Then you go next and say, okay, now I'm going to talk about sports. And you talk about everything about sports, and then you go to the next point. Okay. How do you know how long to make your answers? That's a very good question. Well, I would say that depends. So I know that the example I've given here, so this student has talked about their commitment to medicine, they talk about their academics, you know, they talk about sports, leadership, and being approachable. And I would say depending on how much time you think you have in your interview and how comfortable you are with, you know, just elaborating on your answers. I won't, obviously you don't want, when someone asks you a question, you wouldn't want to just answer them in 2 sentences, but at the same time, you don't want to just go on and on and on, especially sometimes, and guys, especially when it comes to panel interviews where you see the interviewer, sometimes it's important to pick up like cues where you can tell that they're bored with your answer. Like, you know, they keep nodding and like, they're like, okay, like when are you going to be done with your answer? That's when you try and like cut it short and just keep it concise. But how long an answer should be, I would say the best thing that you can do is probably just to talk about 2 points in depth, 2 to 3 points in depth, and to really just go into detail to what you want to tell them, and then wrap it up. I would say that would be 2 to 3 points would be good enough. Do not, I mean, obviously in this example, I've gone for 4, but the thing is, if you can see here, the 4 examples, this student has talked about it very briefly for each of the examples, but I think in interviews, obviously, you would be able to give more detail about your experiences. So probably keep it to 2 to 3 would be ideal, I would say. Yeah. Okay. And lastly, the one thing which I think a lot of students miss out on is after you have answered all of the good qualities about yourself, do not forget to wrap it all up. So you can see the last sentence there. I'm a dynamic, friendly, and conscientious candidate. And you know, just sort of like give a nice, like a cherry on the top to your answers. And then again, if and whenever possible, just talk about how all of these, you know, you can say stuff. So for example, if you're going to talk about perseverance, about how you have persevered through tough times and still be able to have competitive grades and things like that, you can say that that is a quality of yours which you think will serve you well as a medical student. Then you can just give a very brief sentence and say, because obviously in medical school itself, the course is not going to be easy, but at the same time, there's also a lot of things outside the course which you want to get involved in, such as research, leadership, teaching, and obviously perseverance is one of the very important traits that you need as a medical student to power through all of that. You know, just end it very nicely as to how you envision yourself as a medical student. Okay, if you go to the next slide, please. So the next question is, what would you consider to be key qualities of a good doctor? So then again, you can just drop some answers in the chat. Yep, empathy, I like that. It's one of the big buzzwords when it comes to qualities of being a doctor. Listening skills, yeah, resilience, a good communicator that is effective and sensitive, that's very, very good. Yeah.
Not being judgmental, working under pressure, they're coming on really, really fast.
Oh, nice, nice. Well done, guys. Well done. Good. Okay. So I understand that, again, this is just more of like a chat and you guys have dropped in answers, but just bear in mind in your interview, when someone asks you this question, do not just, you know, give them points, but then without quite elaborating on it. Obviously, I do not expect you to elaborate now because it's just dropping answers in the chat. But let's see how these two candidates, and which I'm going to show you how these two candidates have approached the question. So next slide, please, Anna. All right, so response A. So this candidate talks about how the key qualities can be broken down into 3 domains. So academic, generic, and social skills. Then they talk about academic skills where, you know, a good doctor is one who is proactive in teaching others. You know, they do regular audits and they engage in research. And then it goes on to saying about generic skills, where a doctor has good organizational skills, good communication skills, can work with a team, lead a team, and cope with stress effectively. And then good doctors are also friendly, sociable, and approachable. They're caring, selfless, honest, trustworthy, professional, so on and so forth. And then he wraps it up by saying, with all that said, I think I have the qualities of being an excellent doctor, as I love studying science and I enjoy helping my friends, especially with their revision. So what do you guys think of this response? Ends a little vaguely. Yeah. Yeah, I guess when you say ends a little vaguely, meaning the candidate hasn't quite demonstrated how they would, you know, how they think that they are able to show that they also sort of like possess those qualities of being a good doctor. And that's something which you really want to demonstrate in this question. When the question asks you, what do you think are the key qualities of being a doctor? You can go ahead and answer the whole question, but it's always good to spend 1 to 2 minutes at the end to explain how you think that you're able to show some of these qualities as well.
People are also saying that this is more of a list rather than a reflection, or saying how having these good qualities comes in handy for themselves and for patients. They didn't really link it to themselves, and Satu just said how important this is, and also doesn't fully relate to how skills can be useful for a career in medicine.
Well done, guys. So bear in mind again, do not just list things, always be sure to explain. Because while this candidate has not said anything wrong, I think everything the candidate has said is, or they're all true. Those are all good qualities of a doctor. But if you're not able to show insight into it, it's not going to do you much good. All right, if you go to the next slide, please. All right. So, for this candidate, so they've talked about how doctors work in a wide range of teams. You know, doctors work with social workers. You know, doctors from other hospitals, and therefore, like they're able to explain that a doctor will therefore need to be a good team player. And you know, a good team player who invites and respects other people's points of views, you know, keeps them informed and offers help whenever required. And then the candidate goes on to talk about how doctors need to be a good communicator, and then they also explain why so. And one thing that I would really like to bring to your attention here is the last paragraph, where this candidate talks about how they have been able to also demonstrate these qualities. So, for example, over the course of my studies and experiences, I've started to develop a lot of these skills. I work hard in the things that I do, achieve good results. You know, to able to also tell the interviewer that you have worked with different teams in sports or in committees in your school, and that you're also a good communicator and why you think so, and that you just tie it up very nicely by just saying that you know, it gives you the confidence that you can be that you can actually develop, or you can actually gain the skills or develop your skills to be a good doctor in the future. And just to show you how I'm going to break this down, if you go to the next slide, please. So again, I'm just going to explain it in terms of the ARIL method. So if you can see here, the first point that the candidate has brought up is about teamwork. And then the candidate has also explained why, I mean, so they talk about how doctors are people who work with many other professions. And then they talk about why this is so. It's because doctors, you often have to make difficult decisions and you do not work alone. A lot of it requires multidisciplinary decisions, because we're all trying to work towards the benefit of the patient's care. And then this candidate also links it up by just saying a good doctor will therefore need to be a good team player, and then explains why so. Likewise, for being a good communicator, they've also explained it in terms of the ARL method. And the whole thing at the bottom there, if you can see, I've only put an L because that's the link, and that's the most important part to show your interviewer how all of these qualities that you've mentioned links to you yourself being a medical student in the future. So that's just something to really bear in mind, and something we should try and demonstrate in your interview. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so these are just some of the common questions. I'm not going to go through all of them. It's just sort of to show you what are other common questions which can be asked about in a personal insights question type kind of question. Just I would say it's worth having a think about all of these questions so that you do not get thrown off when being interviewed. So just have a think about it. Next slide, please. Yep, and just some key tips to approach panel interviews. So again, like I said at the start of my talk, always reflect on your experiences prior to your interview. Always go for depth over breadth. So for example, you can see in the second mock question, the first candidate just went for breadth. He just really talked about a list of different things, whereas the second candidate, what they did was that they only chose two qualities, and then they went into depth about it. So always go for depth over breadth. And then obviously practice answering questions with a framework they are comfortable with, and speak to seniors and mentors because they will be able to best give you an idea of what is expected of you at the interview. Oh, Anna, I think one of the students have asked if you could show them the common question slide again. Probably just for a few seconds, and then we can move on to Myurri.
Also, guys, yeah, as Myurri just put in the chat, you will be sent a copy of the PowerPoint and the recording. So don't worry if you are unable to write everything down. I think it's much more important that you listen for now, and then in your time, you will be able to go through the slides again and do your further research. And also our mail and Instagram is always open if you have any questions. So yeah, don't worry about it.
Okay, so thank you. I guess the final section is on ethics and group activities. I myself, I've had experience in both in terms of interview settings, so we'll talk about both those right now. So ethics-based questions can really vary depending on which university you're applying for and what interviews you have. So the first thing I would state really before you even think about preparing for it is really read the instructions that you've been given by your medical school. See what they've told you about the interview, because so for example for Queen Mary you get given an ethical article about 2 weeks beforehand for you to prepare for. Some might state that you'll get some sort of scenario questions, they might not hint at it too much, or if you've done what SET has kind of recommended, which is speak to senior students and find out about, you know, what kind of questions they might ask or what kind of themes come up, then you have an idea of what kind of things you should prepare for, then go with that first. So yeah, if we're going from, imagine that you're given like an article or something like that in advance, obviously research it. I know it sounds crazy me saying it, but some people won't, and I don't know why, but some people will not do it. But so please do it. Even up to the day before, look at the news, because things can change, and we'll talk about that in a bit as to why I'm telling you that. But regardless of whether you're not sure whether you get these kind of scenarios or not, read the BBC Health News on a regular basis, especially with all the stuff about COVID. If you want to have a look, there's loads of other resources like the Medic Portal website that has really good information about other medical topics that you might be interested in. So more recently, you can talk about how everyone has now been opted in for organ donation unless otherwise. You can talk about how some countries have made vaccinations mandatory. You know, there's loads of other things that are going on in the world, not just COVID. So do keep your eyes out on that too. It sounds really obvious, but practice answering these questions. You can get questions from the ISC medical interviews book, which is pretty much a gold mine. Have a look at our Insta story over the last month. We've been posting our own ethics questions, which will be on a highlight at the end of the month anyway, so you can go through those. But the overall kind of thing you should do is apply the key ethical principles, which we'll talk about and go over in the next slide, which some of you would have already seen based on Anna when she did it when she went over it in the MMI talk. But consider both sides of the argument and conclude. You might get asked which side you're on, so do have a think about that. or, you know, come up with your, if like the question about having the liver transplant and you have 3 patients, you've got to kind of make your mind up as to which one you would give it to. So, you know, you have to come to a conclusion, so summarize and say, well, based on all of this, I think X. Cool. Just to kind of go over the 4 pillars of medical ethics, you've got autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. So the idea of autonomy, it's the capacity to be your own person. You make your own decisions. Non-maleficence is basically you're not harming anyone. Beneficence is to act in the patient's best interest, and justice is to be fair in the decisions you make to not only the individual, but to kind of all patients as well. And we'll link that in a bit more detail. There are obviously, these are just broad ideas, but you can link this into other sort of principles. So you've got things like Gillick competency, which is about children, capacity and consent. So, you know, the idea of someone being able to make up their own mind and make informed decisions, weigh up pros and cons, and be able to retain that information to give their consent or permission to do what you need to do. Professionalism, so obviously maintaining your integrity and the professional status of a doctor. Euthanasia and abortion, loads of other key topics, again, which you can find all on the internet on your own. So I'm going to try and focus more about how you would kind of apply these ethical principles into a real life question. So imagine that you've got an interview and you've been given this piece of paper on the day, or perhaps even a couple weeks before. And this article here is basically a snippet from a BBC article. It's about Charlie Garden. It kind of gives you the basic information. So it tells you what condition he has, tells you that it's very rare and it's a very rare genetic syndrome. Mitochondrial DNA, if you don't know, is from the mother. So that gives you some idea again of what you should know. This talks about how he was very healthy and his health has deteriorated. He's basically pretty much at the end of his life. And how there's this whole case about whether they can take him to the US for this nucleoside therapy. And we'll talk about how you would answer this, and they go, well, right, argue your case. Tell me what you think about this case, what the ethics about the case, and then tell me at the end, like, what your argument is going to be. So I'm going to give you an example of how I would talk about it, and then in the next case, you're going to be given a different one, and I want you guys to chip in your answers. So we'll talk about how you would apply this. So in terms of autonomy, well, you can talk about how Charlie has a decision to make about what his treatment is, but Charlie is a baby. Charlie hasn't got the capacity, so the ability to retain information, weigh up pros and cons, and make that informed decision himself. So that's up to his parents. So his parents have a right to necessarily decide where they want to take him for his treatment. However, in terms of justice, you have to be fair to all patients. This is a very rare syndrome. And so if you think about it, is it really fair to send this one child with this one condition all the way to the US? Is it fair on Charlie? We don't know how much pain he's in and whether it's literally fair on the parents. Are you giving them false hope by sending him all the way to US and it might potentially kill him on the way, or even when he gets there? Is it really truly worth it? You can think about non-maleficence and how at the end of the day, we don't know how much pain he's going to be in by giving him this treatment. If you were given this article beforehand, you would know that perhaps the research that was done at the time this treatment had only been tested on rats at this point. So is it really worth having Charlie go through as the first human without having enough extensive scientific clinical trial testing and put him through all that when it might not be worth it and might cause more damage than is actually worth having his parents have that last few moments with him? And then obviously with beneficence, it's a duty of care and it's that benefit versus risk. So I'm thinking about, is it really worth the cost? Is it fair? Because the NHS is a public health system. We need to treat every patient as equally as we can and give everyone the best care possible. Is it really worth the NHS helping this family, sending him all the way there when they could be using that money, as sad as it is, to help everyone as a whole in general? You think about, is it really worth it with this trial that's, it's not a valid treatment, it's not been completely authorized. So is it truly worth putting him through maybe unnecessary harm when he could be peacefully passing away or peacefully with his family in those last few moments? And ultimately, by the time when this case has now come to a close, and obviously the NHS and the high courts have decided that it wasn't best to carry on, and you could say that, oh yeah, I agree with that. I agree with the fact that I'm on the doctor's side and the court's decision to keep him here because it's for the best for Charlie more than anything else. Obviously now, if you look at there's cases like this going on all the time. There's baby Isaiah and there's plenty more. So do keep an eye on this, because this kind of topic can come up. It's quite a nice and easy one to kind of link all these 4 ethical principles in. And then obviously you can slide in the whole thing about Gaelic competency, and because he's under 18, he needs his parents' decision and whatever. So there's all that kind of stuff too. But it's important to argue both aspects. So I've always talked about how, you know, it's the parents' minds and their decision and how it impacts the parents and what's the best thing for their grief process, and think about the negatives that could actually harm the parents too, mentally and emotionally, which is not something you want as well. So with that in mind, imagine you've got given this article. This was taken a couple of days ago from the BBC, and it's just some generic information about how COVID vaccine is going on, blah, 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 blah. But imagine you've got to your interview in February, March, and suddenly the vaccine is out and is ready to go, and everyone's queuing up to get their vaccine. So if you pop your messages on the chat, it'd be really great to see, firstly, the first question is, how would you explain how vaccinations work in a quick sentence or two? Pop that in. And then maybe answer the question, which is really, how would you argue this from an ethical perspective? What would you say are the pros of having vaccines, and what would you say are the cons of having vaccines? You can try and link it to obviously the ethical principles, but this is more trying to consider that as well as considering both sides of the argument, because I know people will struggle with trying to answer why you would be against having a vaccine. Yeah, fire away anything that you want. They inject inactive versions of pathogens into the body so the white blood cells recognize them and the body builds up an immunity to them. Fab. Yeah, pretty much. Dead inactive pathogens that trigger our immune response and make white blood cells for future infections. Yeah, good. This is a new vaccine and the long-term complications have not been fully understood. That's a really good negative. Mention memory cells. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the idea that our body memorizes the infection. What else have we got? Inactive / weak version of the virus being introduced to the immune system to produce antibodies. Fab. People are skeptical about how quickly the vaccine was made. Yeah. So if certain companies, yeah, absolutely. The Oxford one, I think, has been in the work for 10 years. So, you know, they've been researching kind of SARS and coronavirus and all that kind of stuff with that vaccine for a long time. But yeah, some of the newer ones like Pfizer and stuff, not as long. Pros are herd immunity. Fab. So if you mention the word herd immunity, you've pretty much ticked the box there. As long as you can explain that how you're essentially protecting the people that aren't eligible for the vaccine. So people that are immunocompromised, that are, for example, like HIV patients, depending on the age range of the vaccine, they might not give it to really young people or really old people. So yeah, you've got to think about that too. The vaccination is the method by which protein or weakened form of pathogen is injected. Yeah, it's all good. Vaccination may not treat all forms of the virus. Yeah, absolutely. If the strain mutates, then you're kind of struggling. That's a really good point. Can't always predict how someone's body will react, so it's potentially harmful to people that we can never fully account for. So yeah, exactly. There are going to be side effects. Sometimes it's literally just a bruise. Sometimes it's, muscle ache. Sometimes it can be anaphylaxis. So we don't know. And not all vaccines are effective for everyone. Exactly. Vaccines contain, there's really good explanations going on here. Really good. More people.
Yeah, you guys are so prepared. Like someone wrote about vaccinations, like the fake news that vaccines cause autism.
Yeah.
And now that has put people off getting it.
I would really recommend that you read into that, just because with the current situation that we're in, it's obviously a really interesting topic to bring up with Andrew Wakefield and how the whole fake news thing with that autism started. Everyone has the autonomy to take the vaccine. Absolutely. Yeah, spot on. Everyone has the right to make their own decision. If someone doesn't want a vaccine, you can't force them. You can find out why and try and change their mind, but ultimately, if they say no, they say no. People might be anti-vaccine due to the recent government might inject because yeah, absolutely. If you go and look at some Facebook comments, just find something where an article has been shared about vaccinating and look on the Facebook comments and you will guaranteed find someone has gone, oh, they're going to inject sharks. Yeah, absolutely. The vaccine was made around in a year. I think vaccines are usually tested, made over a long time. So yeah, vaccines are usually made and tested over a long time. Obviously, I think more money and time has been invested, so perhaps things are speeding up faster. But yeah, I think the main thing from this is make sure you look up what these vaccine trials are up to and kind of get a summary. You don't have to know every inch of the detail, but really go on their like Oxford specific website and just get the information from them rather than hearing it from hearsay comments and stuff.
But you guys are really good. I think we take one question from the Q&A and then move on, because otherwise you're just gonna overwhelm us with your amazing answers. But
really good at
someone asked, how would you suggest answering the question, how would you persuade people against the vaccination to get it?
How would you persuade people? Okay, it's a really good question. So I would obviously explain my opinion on like how it works. So I'm going to explain that in a bit. But how will I persuade someone who doesn't want the vaccine to get it? So I would ask them why and listen to their opinion. Just let them talk at me for a few minutes. Could it be that they're really worried about this whole autism thing? And then you could explain, well, actually research has shown this isn't the case. The doctor that was doing it had not the best intentions and has been struck off and has had this license revoked, and you can explain it in that sense. It depends really on their reasoning. If they think there are injectable trackers, then you can tell them by bringing up you can find on the internet and from the people that have produced these vaccines what ingredients are in there. So if they want, they can have a look and go that there are chemicals in there, yes, but in very minor quantities that are only really there to preserve the vaccine, to make sure they're stored properly and work and last in the fridge and whatever. And you can explain that these ingredients are only really there so that the vaccine is made and works and properly in your body. ICE is also a good way. Ideas, concerns, expectations. So really use that. So let them talk at you, get their ideas, get their concerns and what they expect and why they don't think it's going to work. And then you can explain afterwards, bit by bit, slowly, how it works based on all their problems. And ultimately, if they still say no, then they say no, there's not much you can do. But as long as you explain everything simply and clearly and effectively, then you're all sorted. I'll answer that question now about how I would talk about the answer to this question. So you've all pretty much explained how vaccines work. I'm not going to go over it, but that's just an overview very, very simply. But yeah, the key things to know: you're injecting a dead or a weakened live version of the pathogen. You're allowing your immune system to react to it for probably the very first time, so that the next time they encounter this pathogen in real life, their immune system works faster because they've memorized a response. Pretty much that's the gist of it, but you can obviously go and look up some more. Pros and cons. So these are examples, but you guys have mentioned some really good stuff. So I would talk about how obviously faster immune response, you're not going to experience that many symptoms, if at all any. It's highly effective. Most vaccines are like 90 to 95% effective and are very, very safe. Herd immunity and the opportunity to protect future generations. So when I say if you can immunize a pregnant woman, the antibodies can cross the placenta and protect the baby. Disease eradication, smallpox has been basically eradicated. Or you can get high percentage of people not having the good, like I think there's like 94% of people are currently vaccinated against MMR, and so if you have that, that means people are basically unlikely to get the condition. Cons are side effects, like we said, they're rare but can happen. You could link in fake news and talk about autism as well, or the trackers thing that people are talking about. We're not watching Kingsman in the first one when they all get trackers in their mobile sims. You're not having that in a vaccine. So you can talk about fake news and how people are, that's part of scaremongering, is always going to be a problem in healthcare. Allergy too, or viewpoints against ingredients used in the vaccine. So for example, a lot of vaccines use like chicken eggs, which can be obviously people that are vegan won't like it. People that might be of certain religious beliefs won't like it. So really consider that and go, well, there are some vaccines that are being developed, like the flu vaccine, you can get egg-free formulas, but, it might not necessarily be ethically good for animal cruelty and stuff, or, allergies, not great, you're not suiting to those people. Natural immunity is actually shown to be better than artificial immunity, but you can obviously go away and Google more points to mention, but these are some examples of what you can see. Does that help, I hope? I don't know if there's any questions about this section in particular before we move on to the group activity section.
Someone's asking, if you vaccinate a pregnant woman and the antibody crosses to the baby, won't the antibody be seen as an antigen by the baby, so the baby's white blood cells will kill them?
That's a good point, and that's a good point. I don't think so. I know what you're trying to say, because there's that whole thing about rhesus positive and rhesus negative, and that's blood cell type antigen, whereas this is an antibody. and like a lot of it is kind of should be similar anyway, somewhat, to the mum and baby, because you get like half your genes from your mum anyway, so it should be okay. I wouldn't say that causes a lot of problems generally, though. You might have to Google that, but I don't think so. When it comes to the rhesus positive negative in blood types, that's different, because that's a specific antigen on the blood cells of the mum and a specific antigen in the blood cells of the baby that obviously don't match. So that causes a problem because they're antigens. Because it's an antibody, it shouldn't cause a problem. It's like how you get like the nutrients of glucose and stuff going across the placenta. You know, it's not going to cause any immune response or anything like that within the baby. I hope that makes somewhat sense, but it shouldn't do.
No, I think that makes sense. And there's someone else that asks, how does age have a different effect on administration of the vaccine? I think that if it's only being tested on a particular age range, because you haven't tested on others, you rather won't take the risk to give it to people whose age has not been tested on, because immunitary systems of people at different ages are developed in a different way. Some are maybe not mature yet, and some are too old, so they might react differently. But if it's been tested on somebody that is of your age, then you can be fairly sure that you won't have many different side effects compared to what they've had, if it makes sense. Myurri.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said. Like, it depends on how they've tested it. And also, if you think about it, in a baby, it's a brand new immune system that's like still growing. The baby's growing, the cells are growing, like still there's not a lot there. And with an old person, their body is generally dying. Like, as you get to a certain point in life, everything starts to slowly shut down. Like, cells are dying, your organs aren't as good as what they used to be. And then, you know, there's guaranteed that some people, a lot of the older population will have some sort of comorbidity, be it arthritis or diabetes or whatever. So you've got to think about how the body is at that point. Like, for us at our age group, we're perfectly fine. Like, a lot of us will be fine with it. But for an older 70, 80-year-old whose liver might not be as good, who's, you know, and that makes your blood proteins and your bone marrow, you're running out of cells, and, you know, it's not the best condition to be in. So you've got to really think about it. Also, in terms of the vaccine, just one other point, do make sure you have a look and see whether it's a dead virus or a live weakened, because if it's a live weakened virus, it means it can still technically trigger like the coronavirus effects or something, whereas a dead virus is basically pretty much unlikely to do that. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
With the antibodies to the baby, so the baby usually carries the mom's antibodies for the first 6 months before it starts producing its own. So usually you won't get a rejection to the mom's antibodies, because the baby usually carries it for the first few months and it accepts it because it's sharing the blood with the maternal genes as well.
Thank you, Sharms. We're just now going to have to go through the questions. We've kind of answered the most Q&As throughout the session, but you'll still be able to email us if we don't have enough time to get to every one of you.
Yeah, I've just got 3 slides left, just in case we do have these kind of assessment centres. So they're usually a panel interview and one other activity. Unlikely to have some sort of physical activity. You might get a group task, but just to give you some tips if you do have it, if you're applying next year. Physical tasks are really simple. You usually get given time to read through the task. Delegate based on your strengths and weaknesses. Even if you're not that great at perhaps being that person that builds stuff, you know, try your best and encourage ideas, but you'll have someone that might be responsible for looking after the time. If it's like a time trial situation, make sure that everyone's opinions are heard and that you're not just listening to the sound of your own voice. But at the same time, don't be afraid to call out if someone is trying to say their opinion and someone else is being too loud. Just nicely go, oh, by the way, X is trying to say an opinion, maybe we should listen to them. Or what do you have to say? It can obviously add bonus points if you end up completing the task, whatever it may be, but it's not the be all and end all. Focus on how you interact. That's what they're looking at, how you interact as a team and how you listen and how you communicate. You know, you're all going to be good leaders, and generally medical applicants and medical students all try and take that leader position, but don't be afraid to not take it and be a team player, because that's what they're looking for more. In terms of a group discussion, which they can facilitate virtually, you'll often be given a topic at the start. It could be like social media and healthcare and how that's impacted health campaigns, for example. You might get given a couple minutes to brainstorm some ideas, but don't be afraid if you don't come up with ideas, because sometimes as the conversation goes, you'll come up with ideas, like, because that is how conversations work. They're looking to see how you flow as a group rather than you just bringing a random point in halfway through. They'll rely on one of you to start the conversation, so don't be afraid to be that person and just go for it. You don't want to sit in 5 minutes of awkward silence and waste time. And it's the same principles again. If you think someone is talking too much and someone's trying to say something, ask them to bring their opinion in. Practice with your friends and ask them to pick up any bad habits that you do. Don't let that first time you do a group discussion be in the interview room, basically. Sit with your family or your siblings and have a chat about, vaccines. Sit and have a chat about something and get into that kind of mindset of learning what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Because ultimately, everyone's not going to be acting. They're going to be saying their own opinion and their own thoughts about these things. And if you work together, you will kind of learn from each other what you shouldn't do. But that's what, so question and answer, the floor is yours, Anna, to fire away.
Yeah, so very quick, fast. People ask how long panel interviews usually last, and for what I'm aware is between 20 and 40 minutes. But what would you say, Myurri?
I would say about 20 minutes to up to half an hour. Sometimes people finish in like 15. I think I remember one of mine finishing in 15 minutes, but it really depends on what you say and how much you say and how much they're running behind too.
Someone else, I think this can be nicely answered by Seth, as he's used to doing interviews online as an international student, or anyone else that feels up for it. How would you make a good impression when introducing yourself, especially because this year it's virtual?
Okay, so how do you make a good first impression by yourself? So obviously, I think the question is sort of like seeing how it's going to be different compared to, when how things would be like if it's in person. But I would say virtually, well, first of all, they won't be able to fully see the way you dress because they only be able to see so much of you. But obviously you still want to make sure that you have a clear environment around you. Try and go to a place which is quiet, but obviously you've good internet as well, because I think one of the things which can tick them off is poor internet. As much as we try, I mean, sometimes it may not be your fault, but it can happen sometimes, so just do try your best to get good internet. And I would say other than that, it shouldn't be too much different from how things would be like if it's in person. So for example, when speaking to them, make sure you speak the right tone. Do not come off as too loud and boastful. Like it's just sort of like the common things which I wouldn't say that there's much difference if it's virtual compared to in person. But yeah, just beware of your surroundings, because obviously this time you are in control of your surroundings, and also be sure to dress well, just to make sure that you yourself are also in the mood for an interview with whoever's on the other side.
And think about your camera position too. And it sounds really crazy, but if you're like talking like this, that's not great. And if you're talking like this, that's not great either. So make sure like you think about your camera angle and keep it the same the whole time. Try not to look like you're talking down at them, but then also don't show half your face. They need to see kind of like this much. And yeah, that's like, because that shows how you come across as a person, really.
I think I'm just like typing some answers meanwhile, but the last question we're gonna take is how to deal with not having any offers for interviews yet.
I don't mind asking that one. It's definitely not easy. But the main thing that I found, because I was one of those people that basically didn't get any interview offers when I first applied in school, and then only got into med school after doing a degree. The main thing is some people might treat you like you're walking around on eggshells around you, and that's not particularly nice. To talk to people, especially that your mates that aren't applying to medicine, I found that they're probably the best people to talk to, because they won't be walking around with eggshells on you. And don't be afraid to cry about it, be sad about it, like vent your emotions, because don't keep it in, because it's not good for you. At the same time, I know it's tempting, but don't try and look at the student room portals, because it's not nice. Not everyone on there is actually an applicant. Some of them are just trolls, and they're just trying to be like, oh yeah, I got an interview, but they might not have actually even applied in the first place. And don't be disheartened, because sometimes you get interviews really late. Like Leicester goes on from January to April, May. So it really does depend. And if you don't get it, don't forget the medicine is always going to be there for you regardless. I think that's the main thing. It's not the be all and end all if you don't get it straight away. Just focus on getting those grades that you need, because you can always apply again next year and do even better.
And also, guys, if that's something you're concerned about, In2MedSchool will run a webinar about alternatives into medicine, so other careers you can have or other routes you can take into medicine, doing another degree, doing an access course and more, so stay tuned for that. Lastly, I'm gonna pass the floor on to Brian, the founder of In2MedSchool, who was free and joined us today. We're very grateful for him, and I'm gonna ask him if he has any last minute tips that he would like to give our attendees, or if you want to wish them well.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around. I won't take up too much of your weekend, take up too much of your time. Thank you to everyone who's attended. Thank you to our speakers. I think I would echo everything that's been said today. My big take-home message, though, is that if you are to get an interview, obviously it's very nerve-wracking, very scary, but just enjoy it. I remember when I was going to my very first interview was for Cambridge, and that was the first interview I'd ever done. I've never done any interview, and it felt like, I felt like, okay, I'm going to get absolutely thrown to the walls here. But the thing that I took from it was, so my dad was there with me, and he said, doesn't matter what you do, how well it goes, if you just smile. So obviously, the thing that a lot of people are worried about is about, okay, now it's online and stuff, how do you make a good impression, etc. So obviously it's very difficult, because all the normal stuff like, stand straight, firm handshake, etc., gets thrown out of the window. But the only thing that you can see is your head, your shoulders. So generally, if you can just remember, I think during the interview, just remember to smile, at least look like you're enjoying it. I was actually quite lucky that I really enjoyed my interviews, and if you are actually even trying to enjoy it and you do start enjoying it, that really rubs off, and it really shows to the interviewer that you enjoy learning, that okay, maybe you've come stuck on certain things, but that doesn't faze you. You're enjoying it, you're enjoying learning. I think is the one thing that a lot of them are looking out for. Just a quick thing from me. As Anna says, we're going to do loads of other events. I know it's very scary. You just got your BMAT results and you're thinking, okay, some might not even get an interview, etc. We're going to be doing lots more talks. So we do webinars every 2 weeks. So we've got, I think the next one planned is from speakers that have been on the other side of the table. So we're going to have some doctors talking about what they're told to look out for when they're interviewing students. Okay, so little tips there on what they're told to look out for from interviewees. So do turn up for that. And then, yeah, like Anna was saying, there's loads of other ways into medicine. We'll also be talking about other professions to do with healthcare. So some of you might be thinking, okay, well, maybe medicine right now isn't for me. You might be interested in nursing, in becoming a physiotherapist, etc. And we're going to be doing talks from, we're going to have talks from people involved in those professions as well. As ever, if you have any questions at all, you can drop us a line. You guys would have received an email for this, so you can just send an email back if you have any questions, or find us on any of our social media channels. Myurri is in charge of all of our platforms, and herself and I, we regularly try and keep that up to date. So drop us a question there. We are a very new initiative. We only started 3 months ago. We're trying to make everything free, and and so that's why all these events are free, all our resources are free, our mentoring is free. It would be great if you guys could drop a review on our Google. So if you can fill out the feedback forms, that'd be great. We've also just opened up like a Google business account. So if you go into Google search and you type In2MedSchool, on the right, it should show up In2MedSchool as a business. If you can drop a review, please do. That would be fantastic. And it'll just help us to get some money together just to help us run all of our events. But yeah, that's it from me. Whatever happens, it'll always work out. It always works out for the best in the end. If you get an interview, my biggest message would just be, just try and enjoy it as much as you can. That's everything from me. Again, if you've got any questions, do send it in. You can put it into our feedback forms as well. So I'll pass it back over to Anna.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you so much, guys, for being as engaged as you were today. It's really good to like have a response back because it's very impersonal when you run these events, just looking at your computer, but you were also great and had really, really amazing answers. Please tell us what you thought of this webinar by filling in this feedback form. The link is on the screen. That will give you access to a Google form. After you've completed the Google form, you will receive an automated email with your certificate and the Google Drive link that I've told you before. In this Google Drive link, in about 2 days, we will upload the slides as well as the recording of the webinar. So don't freak out if the recording isn't there at 12:37, because it takes a little while to download it on our computer and upload it there. But as always, if you have any questions, email us at the email address that has sent out the invitation for this webinar, or reach out to any of our platforms, where you will also find the information about signing up to request a mentor, where you can see if you classify for one, if you like belong to a state school or belong to a widening participation program category. So yes, thank you so much. Thank you to our lovely speakers. And please follow us for more webinars and more events. Thank you, guys.